After hosting Christmas, I opened my safe and found my $20,000 emergency cash gone. My dad said, "We gave it to your sister. She's starting a family," and I didn't argue. That night, I made a quiet call. The next morning, I reviewed footage, made a few copies, and by noon, my sister called me screaming, "Why would you do this?" I just said, "You should probably talk to your HR before 4 p.m. I, 32M, had always been the responsible one in my family. While my sister lived paycheck to paycheck and my parents constantly bailed her out, I worked 2 jobs through college, saved every penny, and built myself a modest but comfortable life. The $20,000 in my bedroom safe represented 3 years of sacrifice, skipped dinners, used cars, and saying no to friends who wanted to travel. That Christmas morning started like any other holiday at my house. I'd volunteered to host again because my place was the biggest, and honestly, because I actually enjoyed cooking for everyone. My parents arrived first, followed by my sister and her boyfriend of 8 months. She seemed different, glowing almost, and kept exchanging meaningful looks with him throughout breakfast. After we opened presents, I noticed Dad lingering in the hallway near my bedroom, while everyone else cleaned up in the kitchen. Something about his posture seemed off, but I dismissed it. Family gatherings always made him uncomfortable since Mom's stroke last year. The revelation came that evening after everyone had left. I went to my bedroom safe to deposit the small cash gifts I'd received, a tradition of mine to immediately secure any money. The digital display showed the safe was locked, just as I'd left it. I entered my code, and the heavy door swung open to reveal an empty interior where my emergency fund should have been. My heart hammered as I rechecked every compartment. The important documents were still there: birth certificate, passport, insurance papers, but the neat stack of hundreds was gone. I ran through every possibility. Had I moved it somewhere else? No. The safe was the only place I kept that kind of cash. I called Dad immediately. The phone rang 3 times before his familiar voice answered, and I could hear Mom's television in the background. I asked him directly if he knew anything about my missing money. There was a pause, too long to be natural, before he cleared his throat and explained that they had given it to my sister. She was starting a family, he said. She needed it more than I did. The casual way he said it stunned me into silence. $20,000. 3 years of my life. Gone because they decided she deserved it more. He continued explaining, as if this was perfectly reasonable. My sister had confided in them about being pregnant during Christmas dinner. The boyfriend didn't know yet, but she was planning to tell him soon. She needed money for medical expenses, baby supplies, maybe a bigger apartment. They knew I was doing well financially, and they figured I could spare it. I asked how they had accessed my safe. Dad's voice became sheepish then. He'd watched me open it countless times over the years when I retrieved documents for family paperwork. The combination was Mom's birthday, not exactly creative on my part, he admitted with a nervous laugh. The conversation lasted maybe 10 more minutes. Dad assured me they would pay me back eventually, though we both knew that would never happen. My parents lived on Social Security and whatever odd jobs Dad picked up. My sister worked part-time retail and spent everything she earned on clothes and dining out. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply told Dad I understood and hung up. But understanding and accepting are very different things. That night, I made a quiet call to the security company that had installed my home system 2 years earlier. I'd opted for the premium package after a break-in on my street, which included cameras in every common area and motion sensors throughout the house. The system stored footage for 30 days on cloud servers. The customer service representative was helpful despite the late hour. I explained that I needed to review footage from earlier that day for insurance purposes, not entirely a lie, considering what I was planning. Within an hour, I had access to the web portal with crystal-clear recordings of my entire house. The footage was better than I'd hoped. At 2:47 p.m., while I was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher and everyone else was supposedly in the living room watching football, Dad appeared in the hallway outside my bedroom. He looked around carefully, then disappeared into my room for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. When he emerged, his jacket bulged noticeably on one side. He smoothed it down and checked the hallway again before rejoining the family. The timestamp showed this was during halftime of the game, when the living room was loudest with commentary about the plays. I downloaded the footage and made several copies on different flash drives. Then I did something that would have seemed impossible to the old me. I began planning my response. My sister worked as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized accounting firm downtown. She'd bragged about the job constantly since landing it 6 months ago, mostly because it was the first position she'd held for more than a year. The work was basic: filing, answering phones, scheduling appointments, but the pay was decent and came with benefits she desperately needed. More importantly, her boss was notoriously strict about employee conduct. She'd mentioned several times how he'd fired people for much smaller infractions than theft. The company handled sensitive financial information, and they required background checks and maintained strict policies about employee integrity. I spent the rest of that night researching everything I could about workplace theft, employer notification procedures, and the specific policies her company maintained regarding criminal activity by employees. Their website was very clear about their zero-tolerance approach to theft and dishonesty. The next morning, I prepared a package. The video footage burned to DVD, screenshots printed in high resolution, and a detailed timeline of events. I included photos of my empty safe and copies of bank records showing my regular deposits over the past 3 years, proof of where the money had come from and how long I'd been saving it. The cover letter was professional but direct. I explained that my father, acting with my sister's knowledge and consent, had stolen $20,000 from my home during a family gathering. I provided evidence of the theft and noted that my sister's current employment handling financial records might be relevant to their assessment of her character and trustworthiness. I drove to her office building that morning and hand-delivered the package to the security desk, requesting it be forwarded to her supervisor immediately. The guard assured me it would reach the appropriate person within the hour. By noon, my phone was ringing. My sister's voice was shrill with panic and rage. She demanded to know why I would do this to her, screaming that I was destroying her life over money that family should share. I could hear traffic in the background. She was probably calling from her car in the company parking lot. I let her finish her tirade before responding calmly that she should probably talk to her HR department before 4 p.m. The edge in my voice must have conveyed something, because she fell silent. She asked what I meant, and I explained that her employer now had video evidence of her involvement in stealing $20,000 from a family member's home. Whether she'd been physically present for the theft or simply received the stolen money didn't matter. She was an accessory after the fact. Companies that handled financial information tended to take these matters seriously. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before she hung up without another word. Update 1. Within 2 hours, both parents were calling. Dad was angry, demanding to know why I was punishing my sister for something he had done alone. Mom, despite her limited speech since the stroke, managed to convey her disappointment in me through broken words and tears. I explained to each of them that this was no longer about the money. That was gone, and I'd accepted it. This was about consequences. For 32 years, I'd watched my sister make poor decisions while the family rallied around her, cleaning up her messes and enabling her irresponsibility. She'd wrecked cars that Dad had co-signed for, defaulted on loans that Mom had guaranteed, and moved back home twice when she couldn't manage her finances. This time was different because this time, she'd crossed a line that affected someone outside our family dysfunction. Her employer had every right to know that their employee handling sensitive financial information had been involved in stealing money from her own brother's home. Dad tried arguing that I was being cruel, that she was pregnant and scared. I reminded him that being pregnant didn't excuse theft, and being scared was an appropriate response when facing consequences for criminal behavior. Update 2. My sister was terminated that afternoon. She called again around 5 p.m., this time crying instead of screaming. The HR meeting had been brief and professional. They'd reviewed the evidence, confirmed her identity in the photographs I'd provided, and explained that her employment was being terminated immediately due to conduct incompatible with her position's requirements. She wouldn't be eligible for rehire, and they would be noting the reason for termination in her employment record, information that would likely appear in background checks for future positions in finance or any role requiring security clearance. She begged me to call her employer and explain that it was all a misunderstanding, that Dad had acted alone without her knowledge. I asked her if that was true, and the silence that followed was answer enough. The truth emerged slowly. She had confided her pregnancy to our parents the night before Christmas, panicking about money and the boyfriend's likely reaction. She'd known he wasn't ready for children and suspected he might leave if he learned about the pregnancy. Dad had suggested my emergency fund as a solution, reasoning that I wouldn't miss money I never touched anyway. She'd agreed to the plan, even suggesting the timing during the football game when I'd be distracted. The only thing she hadn't anticipated was the security cameras, a detail our parents had forgotten to mention when they scoped out my house for the theft. Update 3. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks with predictable family drama. My parents positioned themselves as mediators while actually taking my sister's side, suggesting I'd overreacted and destroyed her future over money. Extended family members began calling to express their disappointment in my harsh response to a family matter. The most surreal conversation came from my aunt, who argued that family money should be available to whoever needed it most. When I pointed out that it wasn't family money but my personal savings from years of work, she dismissed this as selfish thinking. According to her logic, my success created an obligation to support my sister's choices. My sister's boyfriend learned about the pregnancy and the theft simultaneously when she broke down and confessed everything. He left that same day, taking his belongings while she was at Mom's house crying about her situation. Apparently, discovering that your girlfriend was involved in stealing $20,000 from her brother is a relationship deal-breaker, even without the pregnancy complication. She moved back in with our parents, sleeping in her old teenage bedroom with its faded pop star posters and participation trophies. The job search wasn't going well. Most positions in her field required background checks that revealed the theft, and retail managers weren't eager to hire someone whose previous employer had terminated them for stealing. Update 4. 2 months later, my sister miscarried at 8 weeks. The family rallied around her grief, and I found myself positioned as the villain who destroyed her life during her most vulnerable time. The narrative became that my vindictive response to a desperate pregnant woman had caused stress that contributed to losing the baby. I knew this was medically nonsense, but grief and family dynamics don't respond to logic. Mom's limited vocabulary now included new words like disappointed and cruel whenever she saw me. Dad stopped calling entirely, communicating only through brief text messages when absolutely necessary. The accusations stung more than I'd expected. I'd never wanted to hurt my sister. I'd wanted her to face consequences for her choices. But watching her spiral into depression while living with our aging parents made me question whether the price of my justice had been too high. During one particularly difficult conversation, Mom asked me through tears if punishing my sister had been worth destroying our family. The question haunted me because I wasn't sure of the answer anymore. Update 5. The final chapter came 6 months after Christmas. My sister found work at a small insurance office that didn't conduct thorough background checks, mostly because they couldn't afford to be choosy about applicants. The pay was minimal, barely enough to cover her car payment and contribution to our parents' household expenses, but it was employment. Dad reached out one evening with an unexpected proposition. He'd been working extra handyman jobs and had saved nearly $3,000 toward repaying the stolen money. He wanted to know if I'd accept payments over time until the debt was settled, even though it might take years. The offer surprised me. I'd written off the money months ago, focusing instead on the principle of consequences and personal responsibility. But something in Dad's voice suggested this wasn't really about money anymore. It was about finding a path back to being a family. I agreed to the payment plan, not because I expected to see all $20,000 again, but because it gave Dad a way to address his guilt and my sister a chance to slowly rebuild some self-respect. The first payment arrived the following week with a short note apologizing for the theft and acknowledging that they'd violated my trust in the worst possible way. My sister included her own letter, written in the careful handwriting I remembered from her school days. She didn't ask for forgiveness or try to minimize what had happened. Instead, she acknowledged that being pregnant and scared didn't excuse stealing from family, and that facing consequences for her actions was appropriate even when those consequences felt overwhelming. She was seeing a counselor now, working through the grief of the miscarriage and the deeper patterns that had led to a lifetime of poor decisions. The job loss had been devastating, but it had also forced her to confront behaviors she'd been avoiding for years. The letters marked a turning point. We began talking occasionally, carefully navigating conversations that avoided the drama of the previous months. She seemed different, more thoughtful, less impulsive. The crisis had stripped away her usual defenses and forced her to examine herself honestly. Final update. Today, nearly a year later, I've received about $8,000 in payments from Dad's side jobs and my sister's contributions. The remaining $12,000 may never materialize, but that's no longer the point. The family has found a new equilibrium, built on clearer boundaries and honest acknowledgement of past mistakes. My sister still lives with our parents, but she's saving money and talking about eventually getting her own apartment. She's dating someone new, a widower with 2 young children who appreciates her cautious approach to relationships and her hard-won understanding of consequences. Mom's speech has improved slightly, and she no longer flinches when I visit. Dad and I work together on small home repair projects, rebuilding our relationship through shared tasks that don't require discussing the past. The security cameras are still active throughout my house. The safe combination has been changed to a random sequence that no one else knows. These precautions aren't paranoia anymore. They're simply realistic acknowledgement that trust, once broken, requires time and consistent behavior to rebuild. Sometimes people ask if I regret my response to the theft, particularly given my sister's miscarriage and the months of family drama that followed. The answer is complicated. I regret the pain everyone experienced, but I don't regret establishing that actions have consequences, even within families. The old dynamic of enabling my sister's poor decisions while I quietly subsidized the aftermath was unsustainable. It had created resentment on my part and prevented her from developing real responsibility for her choices. The crisis forced everyone to confront these patterns, even though the process was painful for all involved. My relationship with my family looks different now, but it's built on more honest foundations. My sister understands that being related doesn't create unlimited license to take advantage of others. My parents have learned that protecting their daughter from consequences ultimately harmed rather than helped her development. And I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is refuse to enable their destructive behaviors, even when the short-term result is conflict and pain. The $20,000 was just money, but the principle of personal responsibility and mutual respect was worth fighting for. The emergency fund has been slowly rebuilt, dollar by dollar, through the same patient saving that created the original nest egg. It sits in the safe again, representing not just financial security, but the hard-won knowledge that some boundaries are worth defending, regardless of the cost.